This evening on the daily agenda, we're going to cover the issue of the British National Party and why it was so heavily populated by working class men, led largely by middle class men, and also how nationalism has transformed today into a completely different entity than what it was then in the early 1990s when I joined the BNP. But before we go any further, please remember to like, subscribe, share and comment on this video, as it helps with the algorithm and gets the message out to a much wider audience, which is exactly what we want, isn't it? So yes, I mean, in 1990 when I joined the British National Party, it quite frankly was purely working class, with a middle class leader and a few middle class leaders at a lower level and some lower middle class people. But the vast majority of the membership activists were working class men. And I guess we all had something in common. It was not that slew of insecurity that the mainstream media always ranted about. In other words, we totally turned our face against the establishment that was destroying this country deliberately. That's what they really meant, but they couldn't say it, and they knew that was the case. And it was certainly the case with me. I mean, my father was a communist. He was a member of the Communist Party, and he later followed their instructions to join the Labour Party. The slow infiltration into the professions and the trade unions, etc., and every other aspect of life, quite frankly. And he wanted me to walk in issues, quite frankly. He wanted me to be an identikit son. And there was no chance that was ever going to happen, because I was just like him in many ways. I was fiercely independent and had my own personality and my own ideas, and no amount of vile anti-British brainwashing was ever going to have any effect on me. And I guess it was all brought back to me really when I watched My Prevent Story by Kai Stevens, which was very interesting in actual fact, to see an eloquent and thoughtful young man, which is what I used to be back in those days, explain how we'd been harassed, quite frankly, for want of a better description, at school by the far left extremists in Prevent. Not to prevent any form of terrorism, not at all. No, the vast majority of nationalists are not involved in any form of terrorism, nor are we advocating it or planning it behind the scenes. It's just a fairy tale, quite frankly. It's made up to counterbalance the fact that they have to deal with the vast majority of the people in the terror watch list are Islamists, over 80% of them, quite frankly. And those who aren't, I have very serious doubts whether as to any of them are really terrorists of any description. I've made that perfectly clear in the past, I'll do so again. But yeah, Kai Stevens, you know, he's coming on the daily agenda in the next few days. And I found his story very interesting. And I'd not so much buried my own childhood, my own past at school, but rather that, you know, as the march of time goes on, new experiences happen, there becomes a data overlay, as it were, and we file things in a cabinet. Sometimes we don't like experiences that we've had and we bolt them in a wardrobe, as it were, with chains and a padlock. But they always break out, so there's no point doing that, believe me, I know from the past, you have to deal with them. But in truth, yeah, watching Kai's story brought it all back to me. And at school, you know, I argued frequently with three communist history teachers, Makoweski, Jones and Hepworth, and all of them basically had it in for me, quite frankly. And I was systematically excluded until the fourth year, when I was between 14 and 15, quite frankly. I was put on a chair at a table under the ante-room corridor stairs in a little dark corner, with no work to do of any description, just sat there as punishment. This semi-solitary confinement is what they considered to be the, I could put it, the requisite response, the reasonable response in their view to someone who basically just wasn't swallowing their communist propaganda and dared to argue with them. But I did dare to argue with them. And then it spread to a Mr. Pavia, who was a careers officer, another rancid lefty, quite frankly. But even the Conservative teachers at that school, Eastwood Comprehensive, who were much more in tune with my way of thinking, did nothing and said nothing. Until when I got to 15, we had a new year head come. A deputy year head. And she then became a deputy headmistress, Mrs. Hall. And she was a great lady in actual fact. And she was very fair and honest and decent. And she took me out of isolation, but it was too late by then. The damage was already done. You know, I had absolutely no intention of seeking an education of any description from that system. They'd basically disenfranchised me. They'd made me feel an enemy. They turned me into a rebel, quite frankly, because sat under those stairs for years, that's where my rebellion grew. It was already there anyway, but they just fostered it. They brought it out. Their repressive measures didn't do anything to stop me or amend my behaviour in any way, shape or form. It just encouraged it. So I can thank them for that. And you'll thank them for it as well one day when you realise some years from now exactly what I've done recently, more than at any other time, to restore nationalism. You'll understand in several years to come what is coming in actual fact. And you'll understand the significance of the docu-series that I've made about the British National Party and nationalism in general, quite frankly. This episode is one of which. And so, in truth, I left school. I had to get a job. My father told me, no, you've got 2 weeks. Yeah, 2 weeks to get a job or you're out, quite frankly, you're out on the street. 10 days later, I actually got a job at Impact Packaging in Ena in Derbyshire, which was a press moulding factory. And I came home with £69 a week after tax and national insurance, where nearly all the kids at my school were on the YTS scheme, bringing home £25. And £69 might not sound like an awful lot these days, but back then, my goodness, it was a big deal, quite frankly. It really was. And I was pretty chuffed with it, you know, because I had a lot more money to spend. And the other kids that I went to school with, who were told repeatedly how wonderful they were compared to me, and that I was always going to be an absolute waste of space and would spend all of my time in prison because, you know, I just couldn't behave. No, it wasn't the fact that I couldn't behave, it was the fact that I would not sit and tolerate their anti-British, anti-white communist propaganda. And that was the case then, and I think it's even worse now. It's only that today it's taken a new format called the wastralism of wokeism, quite frankly, in my opinion. That's all it is, it's wastralism, intellectual wastralism, highly damaging, deeply toxic, and needs to be purged from the entire education system. But that was the end of my so-called education. In fact, I'd already educated myself. I had 2 part-time jobs as a butcher's boy, and I was also in the Army Cadet Force from the age of 13. So it was not a case that I had a behaviour problem at all. It was just that bloody awful school and the communist teachers, propagandists, for want of a better description. Brainwashing was what they were doing. And so, you know, with these, the money that I made from these part-time jobs, and I also did other part-time work as well. I was very industrious at making money. And I joined 2 book clubs and I educated myself. I read what I wanted to read, not what that bloody awful school wanted me to read. I paid no attention to its curriculum whatsoever. I had my own curriculum. I educated myself using Simon's curriculum, quite frankly. And I'm happy about it and I'm proud about it. And so years later, obviously I was working in construction, and some friends of mine said, you know, there's this meeting that goes on in Derbyshire, which is on the horizon, on the near horizon, not the far horizon, and a place called Hilkeston. And I was like, really? I thought those things had died out completely. So out of sheer intrigue, I went along, and all of the lads there, quite frankly, of different age groups, were all working class. And so I was home with the working class people I was used to dealing with, who I'd grown up with. And I could see there that, irrespective of what you thought of it, whether it was right or wrong, this was a working class movement. And why weren't these people with the Labour Party? Which is what my father would have been asking. That's what he would have been thinking. These young men were largely the product of other working class, working men. Some of the miners, like my own father, just weren't interested in socialism. And the patriotism, nationalism, had a far greater appeal to them. And like me, they'd come through this system of being told they were bad people because nationalism was wrong and communism was the lie. You know, it's killed more people than cancer. It is just a mass murder machine. Let's never forget that. That's all communism is. It's a brutally intolerant, misanthropic mental illness, quite frankly. That's all communism is. It's a pipe dream. And so, like them, I rejected it. I also rejected some of the groups I met there because I thought they were just far too hardcore and extreme, like the British movement, for example. Absolutely full of nutcases. And so I decided to join the British National Party. And once in the British National Party, I realised that the vast majority of people there were also working class, just like me. So I was at home, really, wasn't I, with other working class guys. And so, yes, and then obviously there was John Tyndall, who was middle class, and there was some a smattering of other middle class leaders and some lower middle class people, but 98% of the party was working class. And so I thought to myself, well, this is the real working class movement today, isn't it? Not the Labour Party. I mean, I went to school with other guys who were in the Labour Party. In fact, I grew up with some guys who were older than me, who'd become miners themselves, the local Moor Green colliery and other collieries like Babington, etc., a few miles away. And they were disgusted. Why are you with these fascists? Madmen, quite frankly. They're about as stable as mad Christians, quite frankly. It's this ideological disease that they catch, you see. It creates a rage virus, and which also, in turn, fills them with intolerance, whilst hiding behind the drivel of tolerance, love, peace, forgiveness, and all that nonsense that they come out with. Don't believe any of it. Never seen any evidence to prove it either. They don't practice it, I assure you. And so anyway, yeah, there was like, you're going to get really serious problems, being in the BNP. It was just threats, intimidation the whole time. And I was like, yeah, well, you're going to get serious threats and intimidation from me, aren't you? Because I'm not going to back down to you, And I'd grown up in an area where there was, you had to look after yourself, quite frankly. And I was taught to look after myself. My eldest brother was a middleweight boxer. And my father used to be a bare knuckle boxer in the Royal Navy years ago. And so, yeah, and it was a very violent environment, quite frankly. I mean, all of these towns around here on the Nottinghamshire-Derbyshire border had intense rivalry. We couldn't go to a town, even just up the road, 2 miles up the road in Nottinghamshire, without getting into some form of aggro, a battle. Likewise, you couldn't go into Derbyshire, particularly into Ilkeston, and without getting, definite direct contact with the enemy, for want of a better description. And just about there, you can't see it, obviously, it's a few miles away. There's a place called the Shipley Boat Inn, and we used to meet up there every weekend for a battle between Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire, and it was just crazy, quite frankly. And I can say that it's not just as a retrospect, looking back on it. At the time, I thought to myself, this is absolutely crazy. And when I joined the BNP, I found that because I was visiting guys in the BNP in Ena and Ilkeston and Copmanay and Kimberley and Mansfield and Ripley, Alfreton, etc., further afield, all these towns around here, I was just accepted, and the vast majority of the conflict that once was had gone because, hey, he's in the BNP like us, and we're united in the same cause, and that was a great thing about it. And so the reason why so many working class white men, obviously, joined the British National Party is because the Labour Party had completely and utterly sold them down the river. They were obsessed with immigration, quite frankly, and immigrants, and race relations, and of course, after Michael Foot, that utterly disastrous leader of the Labour Party, and there was just a realisation that, I used to watch it, in childhood, and My dad used to say certain things about, well, at least he's genuine and sincere and he fights what he believes in. But in truth, the man had no appeal to me whatsoever. Neither did the CND movement. I couldn't relate to any of these people. All of their iconography, you know, socialism, Marxism, communism, full stop. And people say there's a difference between communism and socialism. There really is no difference whatsoever. Socialism is the foundation on which communism is built. Soviet socialist republics, etc. And so I rejected it completely. And I remember being involved in many street battles, which I've explained in the past, in the BNP docu-series itself, the main body of it. And I always used to think back to these teachers and how they'd given me such a bloody awful time at school, and that year in isolation under the stairs. And I guess you could say, for want of a better description, it was payback time. It was payback time, absolutely. I never felt a thing about what I had to do with the left at all. And I think it was the vast majority of the case with my colleagues. But that said, you know, I have to be honest, at least half of the men that joined the British, young men that joined the British National Party were useless. I'm being totally straight with you, they were useless. They were daydreamers, quite frankly. They wanted a glorious revolution within 2 to 3 weeks. And once they realised, you know, out there on the front line, in direct contact with the enemy, the procedure they had to follow to make these daydreams come true, they weren't really that interested. And I had an awful job trying to knock these people into shape. And some of them were just beyond the pale and couldn't be knocked into shape, quite frankly. And so, yeah, that's just the way it is. But absolutely, the vast majority of the BNP was working class, because we were at that curve moment where the white working class was starting to turn away from the Labour Party in significant numbers, in actual fact. Not enough to enable us to win a raft of elections. That came later under Nick Griffin. And also there'd been marked policy changes as well. And, you know, a strategic initiative that was quite different from John Tyndall's, which was absolutely necessary. And that wasn't Griffin's doing either, you know, that was on the agenda. Back in the early 1990s, I was one of the people trying to make it happen, unsuccessfully, I might add, because the time just wasn't right for nationalism to evolve in the way that it has evolved now, today. And so it was a very difficult time, but whilst I realised it was great having this working class camaraderie, I was mindful of the whole time that we needed to bring in more middle class people, lower middle class people, which is a very interesting bracket, social class bracket, isn't it? Lower middle class. So how do you explain that? So that's someone who's just recently left the working class, i.e. migrated from a council estate into their own house. They still have a manual labour job, and they bought their own place, etc. and they've been slightly upgraded. I mean, this is the nonsense of the British social class structure. But, you know, it was important to bring them in. And I've actually found the low middle class to be incredibly selfish, very, very selfish, and totally obsessed with financial advancement, because they'd grown up on these working class council estates, etc., and they didn't like them, and they weren't cut out for them, quite frankly, and they wanted to climb the ladder to upper lower middle class, for want of a better description. Not quite middle class, but, you know, as close as they could get to it. And all they were interested in was making money. And recruiting them was very difficult. Middle class people was probably slightly easier, but it was much easier to recruit working class men. Half of them were useless, sadly, and that's just the way it is. But yeah, I realised that we needed to have a much broader appeal, and to do that we had to bring in, you know, people from other class structures, and we also needed more women, because the British National Party was direly lacking in women. We had almost no female representatives of any description, and it was just seen as and portrayed this way by the media, as a white working class street army, you know, thuggish street army, which in fact it wasn't at all, in truth. It was for some people, it wasn't for me. But yeah, you know, the difficulties of doing this were made much more severe because of the appalling mainstream media coverage. Well, we were never going to get a good press from them anyway. We were never going to get a fair hearing. Forget that nonsense. We knew that. It's perfectly obvious. But slowly and surely, we set about doing it, and I tried to mix with a different circle of people, and but always, you know, you had to be mindful of the fact that the British National Party's membership was working class. 99% of it was working class. The leadership cadre was middle class, lower middle class, and even though I was working class, I was promoted through the party quite rapidly. And but you know, I reached a stagnation point as Midlands elections officer, as I said in the docu-series, and I became aware of the fact that I was going to be stuck there for quite some time, which I didn't like, because I had ideas that I would put into action, and I was trying to circumvent my way around it, but ran into a whole raft of difficulties of the nature that I described in the docu-series. And that's just the way it is. And I don't cry over spilt milk, you know, I just get on with it. And yeah, the issue was, how do we reach out to the lower middle classes and the middle class? Well, in truth, despite all of our efforts, it took great changes in society to make that happen. After Blair came to power, the Blair years were disastrous, quite frankly, for Britain. You know, the Blair immigration wave, or the immigration bomb. An invasion is what it was. Deliberate, orchestrated invasion. And then obviously society started to change. So as the BNP had moderated itself and changed its membership rules, under duress I might add, although the membership rules had been relaxed somewhat, society itself was changing because, you know, lower middle class people were no longer feeling affluent, they were no longer feeling secure, they were starting to see the threat at the door, and more of them started turning to the British National Party. But it still remained almost entirely a working class movement. But more lower middle class and middle class people were actually joining the party. It was changing slowly, very slowly, you know, not fast enough for some people. I wanted to make much more rapid changes in the BNP than what Griffin did, and Griffin wouldn't go along with them because he feared disenfranchising some of his hardcore, and I really do mean hardcore in the sense of extreme people, hardcore supporters. I didn't want them in the party at all. I thought they were toxic, bad news in actual fact, and needed to be removed, you know, to professionalise the party. Griffin wouldn't do it. That's one of the reasons why I walked. There's no point sticking around to waste any more time and energy on that. Been there, seen it and done it. And so, you know, I wouldn't exactly say so much from the sidelines, but rather in the wilderness, quite frankly. I walked off into the wilderness. It was a very, very lonely place. And I was in the wilderness for a very long time, you know. And I've covered that in the Hunted docu-series. And I'd advise nationalists to watch the Hunted docu-series, because that's where I emerged from. That's where I emerged from to make this docu-series and all of the episodes that I've made about nationalism. You know, that had a more formative impact on me than the British National Party did. Because the Hunted years, the underground, was actually substantially more intense, far more intensive living than the British National Party. And there were many years whilst in the underground, I guess you could say alone in the darkness, in the wilderness, quite frankly, where I wondered if I would ever emerge from it again. But I always kept very much focused on the light ahead, even when I couldn't see it, quite frankly. When all I could see was darkness, the black rain falling, as it were, I still focused on the white light ahead, you know, a light at the end of the tunnel. There was no tunnel. I couldn't see any light ahead. For years, in actual fact, it was just darkness. And I just kept on walking and walking and walking through that black rain. It was like walking, in truth, like walking through black sleet, sharp, black, cold sleet for years. And then eventually I arrived at a place where I'd foreseen in a dream And whilst the dream in itself didn't come entirely true, the happy valley, as it were, the brighter day, the end of the black rain, the dark underground did come to an end. And now I'm in a position whereby I can actually make the BMP docu-series, and prior to that also the Hunted docu-series. It's years ago now, basically, and so I'm able to relate it because I understand it properly. It's never best to make anything as you're just coming out of it, because everything's just a confused mess, quite frankly. You need some years between the experience so you can put everything to a proper, orderly format and explain it to people in the most lucid and rational way possible. You don't want to come across as being chaotic. And so I'm now back from the underground, but I'll never forget that darkness, ever. You know, the terrors of the night, so to speak. No, not just so to speak, but for real as well. Yeah, I'll never forget it. You know, it's there nearly every night in actual fact, when it gets dark. But the thing is, I'm back from that now, and I can make these videos, and I can help nationalists in the only way that I know how to, the only way that I'm able to at this moment in time, because of serious health problems. And so what I'm saying is that, put it into context, the British National Party is gone, the National Front is gone, forget all of those organisations. The British Democrats is largely the BNP old guard trying to do their best with appalling leadership, quite frankly. And Jim Lethwaite, well, do I need to go on any further about Lethwaite? What was it one of the National Housing Party lot said about him? He looks like a tramp off Camden Market. Well, actually, it's just, irrespective of that, you know, quite frankly, that's not for me to say. It's just an amusing anecdote in actual fact. But the real issue is the man has no real leadership skills whatsoever. So let's eliminate the British Democrats from the equation completely. That's done. That's just that's like a BNP memorabilia club, quite frankly. That's the way I regard it now. The patriotic alternative is just Hitler and Mosley simping, you know, National Action fanboys, quite frankly. And yeah, if you want to get on the extremism list and end up in jail, go and join Patriotic Alternative. It's not a credible political organisation at all. British movement, yeah, same old failures, quite frankly. Same extremism list, you know. And so that leaves what? Blood and honour? Yeah, absolutely. Well, blood and honour's failure in this country is well and truly documented, isn't it? I don't think we need to document it again. It's never been for me, quite frankly. I had a taste of it in the early 1990s, briefly. Definitely not for me. Far too extreme. And so what we're left with is the Homeland Party, where the transformation of nationalism is coming together quite rapidly in a very professional and responsible manner, which Kenny Smith actually calls sensible nationalism. Some people question sensible nationalism. What does it mean? Well, my own understanding of sensible nationalism, as Kenny puts it, is that it's not committed to a policy that the BNP was in 1993, 1994. And whilst I've also explained in the docu-series that it was absolutely necessary to use direct action against the far left because of their extremely violent activities, at the end of the day, whilst you're doing that, you can't win elections. And so the left aren't like that now. I mean, you can't compare Antifa to Red Action and Class War and anti-fascist action. I mean, they're just not in the same league. Antifa is a joke, quite frankly. But even the centre-right can't turn over Antifa, which shows just how much of a joke they are, doesn't it? I just had to get that one in. Because the centre-right, in truth, are actually worse than the far left, in my opinion, in terms of being our real political enemies. But the Homeland Party now sees a pretty broad mix, in actual fact, of young working class and middle class and lower middle class men working together towards sensible nationalism, in a peaceful manner, with grassroots politicking and building the community level. And this is where and how to win elections. And in truth, this is I guess you could say, this is what I always wanted the British National Party to be. I didn't really want to be involved in direct action battles. In all honesty, I had no idea what I was joining in 1990, but the rest is history, and I've explained what it is in the docu-series. So I didn't need to recover it again. But the simple truth is, nationalism has changed. It is changing even more so. Some people say, I don't like it because it's too moderate. Well, go back to the hardcore days. There be failure. There be failure down that road. You know, go back to those days if that's what you want. Go back to it and see how far that gets you. It'll get you exactly where you got before. Pretty much nowhere, you know. And that's why I argue that what's happening in the Homeland Party is absolutely the right thing to do. And that the sensible, moderate nationalism path that they're taking is actually working. Whilst they don't have, you know, a huge swathe of councillors because they don't have this big money machine behind them and the mainstream media promoting them like Deepfake Reform UK. The best thing about Homeland is this: the Reform UK bubble is going to burst. When it does, the pieces are going to shatter all over the political hemisphere. Quite frankly, the vast majority of their working class supporters and some of their lower middle class and middle class, yeah, will be up for grabs. But particularly the vast majority of their white working class supporters will be ripe for recruitment by the Homeland Party. And that's why it's essential for the Homeland Party right now to put into place a professional structure of moderate, sensible nationalism and to train their representatives in the most self-responsible and professional manner possible to ensure that they can maximise this bubble burst moment when it comes. And it's definitely coming, I assure you, without a doubt. I mean, what credibility does Reform have now? After the rantings of fake Farage, toxic ties, and David Bullshitter, quite frankly. And they're not bothered about whites becoming a minority and, you know, pushing LGBT, etc. And, you know, immigration has always been the lifeblood of this country and we can't cope without immigrants. I mean, they are the centre-left. Let's be honest, they really are the centre-left. You know, Farage is a liberal Tory. He can be a Thatcherite parasite when he can be bothered, quite frankly. The rest of the time he's just a liberal economist, quite frankly. But, you know, there are great opportunities coming once the public realise that Reform is deep fake. The bubble is going to burst, it will shatter, the pieces will scatter in every single direction you can imagine. And then that is the moment when the Homeland Party should be in position to pick up a lot of those pieces and put them back into an orderly, disciplined, structured organisation, you know, a professional format, and send them forward into the battle that we need to fight. Because Reform is not the end. Reform is definitely not the end. It's just a passing phase in British politics. We've seen it all before, quite frankly, nationalists. You know, these deep fake imitation game operators, the safety valve. We've seen so many iterations, I have, of the safety valve operation. You know, eventually its shelf life runs thin and Fake Farage is in the last chance saloon, quite frankly. There'll be no reinventing him after this. I absolutely assure you. This is Fake Farage's very last invention. When this is done, he's gone. Tice has zero appeal. Bull, zero appeal. Okay? The mainstream media can't do anything with them. There is no one else whatsoever. And as for Tommy Robinson, get real, quite frankly. You know, the only thing Tommy's good at is grifting, snorting cocaine, quite frankly, living a luxurious lifestyle with free money from the free money tree, and robbing working class people. That's right, robbing working class people, most of them white working class people. But, you know, quite frankly, they deserve it because they're stupid. They should have seen through what Tommy is a long time ago, but that's their problem, you know. And I keep telling Kenny Smith, you know, for all it's worth, you know, not to waste his time on trying to recruit people who've been influential in the centre-right, and particularly where they're centre-right Christian Zionists. It's always going to end in tears because we are diametrically different people, fundamentally opposites. We have nothing in common. But what we do need to do, you know, is to put in place a proper leadership cadre, which is happening right now, to enable us to hoover up all of those shattered pieces when the reform bubble bursts. And so I can absolutely tell you for certain that after 35 years involvement in British nationalism, that I've seen so many changes over the years. Nationalism has changed. The British Democrats needs to make enormous changes before we'll ever get anywhere. In truth, it's a BNP fanboy club. That's basically my opinion on it. I don't think it's ever going to cut the grain, quite frankly. It'll pick up a lot more councillors, for certain, without a doubt. But eventually, providing Kenny does the job in a way that I know he can and should do, you know, the Homeland Party will completely outstrip the British Democrats, if he plays the game correctly. But at this moment in time, nationalism is changing rapidly based on decades of experience. Kenny has decades of experience. He joined the British National Party a year after I did. We have very similar experiences and a very similar understanding of what needs to be done to moderate nationalism and to turn it into a professional political fighting force. And I'm not talking about fighting as in violence. I'm talking about fighting a campaign to win, quite frankly, at the ballot box. Absolutely. The battle at the ballot box is not over. Absolutely not. Definitely not. And once Farage and the bubble bursts, quite frankly, you'll see that the battle most definitely is not over. Because then what will happen is there'll be a battle several ways between the Homeland Party, followed by the British Democrats, and also UKIP with Mad Nick Tenconi, you know, David Koresh II. I hope he doesn't produce David Koresh III, IV, V, that tell. Goodness me, the thought of it is horrifying. You can see I've made it perfectly clear I'm not fond at all of religious fundamentalists of any description, whether they be Islamists, Christians or Jews, anything. And Abrahamism just breeds them by the bucket load, doesn't it? But not so with paganism or atheists, I might add. And that's a very interesting point that you need to settle on as well. Because the Homeland Party has a very broad mix of pagans, atheists and nationalists. No other nationalist organisation has that. And in that way, quite frankly, it is an absolute replica of the British National Party under John Tyndall, you know. And that much hasn't changed and never needed to change. The British Democrats is just full of crackpot Christians, or people pretending to be Christians, quite frankly, you know, and they're just totally and utterly obsessed with Jewish scripture. Patriotic Alternatives full of crazy Christian identity people, you know, nuts, really crackpot organisation. Stay away from it, quite frankly. If you've got any sense, if you haven't, then get involved with it, you know, you'll rue the day. But I don't think anybody will rue the day by joining up with the Homeland Party to learn that nationalism always needed to change, and it is changing, and it has changed quite rapidly in actual fact and fundamentally, and that there are going to be even more changes ahead to give us the best possible chance of winning elections. Some people might not like them, and again, that's just the way it is. But you know, at the end of the day, nationalism has to moderate, it has to succeed, otherwise we're finished, because the rot is so deeply ingrained in our society. I mean, you can see it with the likes of Reform UK and UKIP, etc. The fact that these, I mean, UKIP, I mean, there's a notorious photograph of Nick Tenconi with his so-called activists. Most of them are non-white, I might add, yeah? It's spot the white man, literally spot the white man routine. They've got a banner with the disciples of Christ behind him, 3 Christian crosses. They look like a, you know, a combination of the Ku Klux Klan and the Seventh-day Adventists, the Branch Davidians at Waco. And he's ranting and raving like a mad minister, you know, out to fleece you. And I won't say the rest of it because I don't think the YouTube algorithm really would like it or tolerate it. But quite frankly, what I saw there was a madman utterly committed to their very own version of the diversity delusion. And so therefore we must ensure that madman, Nick Marcel Tenconi, or Nick the Greek as we refer to him mockingly, must never be in a position to hoover up all those pieces from the dissolution moment in Reform UK that is coming. And that is why the Homeland Party is leading the, how could I put it, the entirely necessary cleaning up operation of nationalism that had to be done years ago. And it could have been done in actual fact under Griffin. Griffin could have recruited far many more middle class and lower middle class people, and also many more working class people as well, and created an absolute powerhouse of an organisation. But he didn't. He deliberately blew it and threw it, and we all know the reason why, you know. But that's done now. But we need to learn from that mistake as well, and that's what the Homeland Party is trying to do. And this is what I'm trying to explain to you, is that nationalism today is no longer just about working class men being its membership. There's a whole, I would say probably in the Homeland Party, working class men are probably, fewer in number than middle class and lower middle class. I don't have the exact figures because I don't have their membership list, and nor do I want it. But from what I've seen of the activists, I can see that there are a broad mix of middle class, lower middle class and working class, and they're very well educated, quite well educated as well, which is what nationalists need to be. And so nationalism has changed, and it's going to make even more changes to ensure that it has the best chance of success up against the imitation game. Because believe me, it is not the far left that is the problem. They have no broad appeal electorally, never have done, never will do. Despite the fact that Starmer is himself far left, a Trotskyist, playing the democracy game, that's an old ruse. But it's not the far left that is the problem that we face really at the ballot box. That can be dealt with, that can be beaten. The real problem we face is the centre-right imitation game led by fake Farage, and then Marcel Tenconi, Nick the Greek, wants to replace him, and then of course you have David Curtin, the Heritage Party. All of these people just, descended from UKIP anyway. And quite frankly, my own opinion of UKIP is that anyone involved with it at an activist level, particularly senior activist level, not to be trusted. Not to be trusted. I've seen them in action. I know what these snakes are capable of. I know the trouble that they cause, the disruptive action, the infighting, and most of it is by design. They don't want anything to succeed. And so I would urge you to keep them out of the ranks of nationalism, because they are not nationalists. We do not need them. We do not want them. And we can succeed perfectly well without them. A fact which was proved when the British National Party won 1 million votes at its high watermark and outclassed UKIP in the domestic context. Nationalism can do that again. The Homeland Party most definitely can do it. And for all those people who keep saying, why isn't the Homeland Party making more progress? Well, have you become a member of the Homeland Party? Have you donated any money to it? Because at the end of the day, this is not a Tommy Robinson grifting operation. Those trees in the background, money doesn't grow on them. The Homeland Party can't just come along and pick free money from the money trees and create a hugely successful organisation overnight to rival deep fake reform, can it? It has to rely on grassroots financing, i.e. you and I. That's the way it is. No bankers are going to back it, no Elon Musks, etc. This is just hard fact, hard reality. And so therefore, that's one of the reasons why the Homeland Party isn't progressing as rapidly as some people would like, because they just sat back on the sidelines doing nothing, passing comment on it, and they actually need to do more. And if all they can do is donate 20, 30 pounds to the Homeland Party, then they should do it. They should do it. And then they don't have to sit back and ask themselves why the Homeland Party isn't progressing as rapidly as they would like to see. If you're so concerned about that, make it happen. Send them a donation. Give them a donation. And then things will speed up very rapidly. But I can assure you, as I said, I reiterate one time, finally, that after 35 years, nationalism is changing for the better It's in the right direction, but it needs your help, your activism, and your financial sponsorship to ensure that it succeeds. You know, there's no other way it's going to happen. There's no fairy godmother just going to turn up with a magic wand and waft it and everything's going to change. And we all know that, don't we? We should know that. All of us, in actual fact, by now. But I assure you, you know, nationalism is no longer specifically, I guess you could say, an esoteric sect for young white working class men. You know, it's wide open to anyone who wants to be involved in it, including more women as well, of all age groups and social backgrounds. And nationalism should not be about creating or reinforcing any form of social class division, but rather bringing people into the fold where we're all treated equally because we're nationalists, irrespective of whether they're working class Odinists or working class Christians, etc., middle class ones, lower middle class, etc. We're all treated equally because we're nationalists, first and foremost. And we're all given the same opportunity based on our abilities and our commitment. And I can assure you that things are moving in the right direction. But more work has to be done. Absolutely. And so, because so many people have said, why aren't things happening faster than they are? Then I'll have to say this to you basically, you know, in closing, make them happen faster. If you don't like what you see, make them happen faster. Get involved. If it's only giving a donation, get involved and things will start to speed up. But I assure you, and I say it again, nationalism most definitely is changing in the right direction. It's heading towards the victory it's always strived towards since the 1970s with the National Front. That victory is coming, but it will never happen until you become active and you encourage other people to be active, even if that is only handing a donation in the right direction once in a while. Get active. Get active with the new nationalism and win.